Here's a program I've redone recently to use Pandas. You may remember that Pandas can help you read data from comma-separated values, CSV files, and query it and access it. So let's run this so you see what it's all about. What airport ID? Okay, an airport ID is something like KSFO. That's an identifier. And I made the program so you can just do SFO if you want to. That's more natural for non-pilots. And let's see, let's try Oakland Airport. And Oakland Airport. So who has long runways? San Francisco has pretty long runways. Oakland has this really long runway. I've landed on 28 right and 28 left in small planes. EDW, check out this runway. This airport. Have you ever seen Edwards Air Force Base? A picture of it from the sky, maybe? These are really long runways. Wow. Okay, well, I got this data from a web page. Actually, it's stored on GitHub. And let's look at how this all works. Program starts here with calling run, and run encompasses all this stuff below. And I'll just go over things as we need them. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 functions inside the run function. And first thing we do, cache files if needed. These files are pretty big. They're many megabytes. So you don't want to be fetching them from GitHub every time you run the program. So this function will go and get the file and save it in your local file system so that when you run next time, it doesn't have to get it again. So that's this, and we'll take a look at it. Then we create the Pandas data frame for the airports. So I think we should probably go in there and have a look. These are the columns in the CSV file that we want to use. And we want the name, the identification, the type, and so on. And then we read the comma-separated values file from the cached file that we created in this step here. And we say that the ident, that's like the KSFO, will be the index of the data frame, and we want to use these columns. And then we modify the type column to be a category. And then we modify the elevation feet column to be a 32-bit integer. The reason it's mischaracterized as a float, a real number, is that it has missing values. And so when we say fill NA values with 0, then we can use isType to use an integer instead of a float. Okay, so that creates the airports data frame. And then we create the runways data frame. And that's this next function. So here are a bunch of columns about runways. And we read that CSV file from our local copy of it. The index column here is not the ident. It's a little different. It can't be the ident because you can have multiple runways for one identifier. So the index column is an ID, which is just a number. And then we change the length feet and width feet columns so that they're using 16-bit integers. So what's the longest runway you could imagine? Will it fit in a 16-bit integer? 2 to the 15th minus 1, something like that, would be the largest number you could store. And that's plenty big. But an 8-bit integer that only holds from 0 to 255 will not hold the length of long runways. Okay, now we've run through here. I guess we'll take a look at how the caching works just briefly. We first make a directory for the cache, which is aviation cache in the current directory. And we ignore an error if it exists already. And then, for both of the two files we're interested in, we create the path and file name where we'll find them. And If it doesn't exist, in other words, if we haven't fetched them, then we print this little message that we're fetching, and then we open for writing the file that we're going to save the copy into, and then we use requests, the requests package, to get the data from that URL. And we then get the text from that, and then we write that into the open file. So that's how the fetching from the World Wide Web works. Okay, now here starts our main loop, and this is where it asks you with input what airport ID, and then it strips off any white space, turns it to uppercase. And then here we're doing the fun little trick where if you don't type a K, but your identifier really starts with a K, this will put it in for you. And then if there is an airport with that identifier, then we do print airport info. So let's go into that. Now we're in this function. And here we look up in the airport's data frame using the identifier, and that gives us an airport data frame. And then we can use that to extract the values from it. The name, the region, municipality, elevation. And we print those. And finally, we print the runway info, which is here. We print runways, and we find the runways for an airport in a different way than we found the airports. So you remember for the airports, the index of it was the ident. So we can use this formulation here to get it. But here, when we're getting the runways, we need to use something a little bit more complicated. This here. Then we use this iter tuples, which says you've got a bunch of runways here, and we want to loop over them. And this gives us tuples holding the data. So you see we use the dot notation here. So row dot. The LE and HE, you can land on either end of a runway, depending on which way the wind is coming from. And the low numbered end and the high numbered end, that's what the LE and the HE stand for. Okay, I'll run one more time. Let's see, where have you been? KLAS, Las Vegas. KTVL, South Lake Tahoe. I've flown there a few times. Oh yeah, that only has the one runway. And what's the elevation? It's pretty high up there. Okay, you'll find the link to the code in the notes, and I'll see you next time.